My name's Emily. Some of you might know me because I'm here most of the time, running around and trying to get the donuts out and everything. But yeah, I wanted to talk today a little bit about architecture, like architecture, like buildings, not like what we call architecture, and the history of disability activism and how that relates to the web and what we do every day. AKA, let's not fuck this up twice, please. So, yeah, a little bit about me. I helped co-found DonutJS actually almost 2 years ago. I started working on it in like November 2015. Pretty happy it's still here. And I took a little bit of a break this year because I started a flower farm in the Willamette Valley. So if anybody needs flowers, hit me up. Still engineering during the day though, for now. Anyway, so the history of the wheelchair dates back to about 300 BC in China, where records show that this wheelbarrow-type furniture was used to mobilize people with disabilities. Of course, if you Google it, it says that it was invented in England. Like most inventions, like people in the West try to pretend like they did it first, but they didn't actually do it first. So. And disability activism has existed in the United States well before the 20th century, but it began to build a ton of momentum after World War II, when a lot of veterans were coming home with disabilities and they couldn't access the services that they were promised. It also built a lot of momentum around the civil rights era, because the civil rights movement really laid the foundation for the idea that groups of people could be protected under the U.S. law. And so without the civil rights era, we really wouldn't have a lot of the disability rights that we have right now. So one notable activist that we'll come back to later is Ed Roberts, who was a student at UC Berkeley's in the 60s, and he was a pioneer in his field. When he first applied to UC Berkeley, he was denied because of his disability, but he and his family pushed back, and he was eventually admitted. But when he arrived, he was told that he couldn't live in the dorms and he would have to live in the campus hospital. And he met a lot of other students who also had to live in the hospital, and they created a group called the Rolling Quads. And they pressured UC Berkeley to implement barrier-free measures for students with disabilities. And UC Berkeley ended up being one of the most accessible campuses in the nation at that time because of him and his group. One of the most badass things that he organized was this middle-of-the-night renovation of the campus pathways, where him and other activists stomped down curbs and laid asphalt to create accessible ramps all over. And in the morning, like, everyone woke up and was like, well, what happened? So I thought that was pretty cool. And this group of students eventually formed the Center for Independent Living, which advocated for an idea at the time that was pretty radical, that instead of putting people with disabilities in nursing homes and assisted living facilities, society should instead remove barriers so that people with disabilities could lead independent lives. So it was that first time that idea that, like, maybe the rest of the world should change instead of just putting people in nursing homes. Pretty cool idea. So this idea led to the Architectural Barriers Act in 1968, which required federal buildings to remove barriers to access. And it was the first major piece of legislation that afforded people with disabilities access rights. So only 2,268 years after the wheelchair was invented, but it was still something. And once this was passed, architects were forced to start making public buildings accessible. And to do this, they often created these long ramps like this, or separate entrances on the other side of the building. And while everyone could indeed gain access to buildings, these add-ons were expensive, unsightly, and further created a sense of othering for those in wheelchairs or mobility devices. And many public buildings had these separate entrances, and a lot of buildings still do to this day. And it's kind of an example of like compliance-oriented design versus like holistic design. And these kinds of designs can create further create a sense of othering for people with disabilities, and kind of cement even more deeply the stigma that people with disabilities already have. To me, I think this is really lazy design, and I feel like I'm seeing it a lot right now in tech, where a site is built without any accessibility in mind, And then later down the line, the company will get a customer support message or an engineer that really cares about it, or even a lawsuit. And then they decide it's time to fix it. And at this time, as everyone knows, like I think we've all worked in spaghetti code before or legacy code, it's really hard to go back and fix like even like markup. If you just fix like an ID or something like that, you could just totally mess up a whole website. So it's not the smart way of doing accessibility. You can do it that way, but I think we're better than that. So back to architecture. In the late 70s, the concept of universal design was introduced by Ronald Mace. And universal design is the concept that spaces should be designed to be aesthetic and usable for everyone. And it not only meets the standards of accessibility set forth by the Architectural Barriers Act and the ADA, but it goes well beyond them. So, and also like the idea of universal design is that making these holistic design choices and building accessibility into designs actually creates a better experience for everyone. This is a shot of the Ed Roberts campus at UC Berkeley, which is the same guy who led those secret ramp building missions in the middle of the night. It's located right on top of a BART stop, and it's one of the best examples of universal design that I could find. It's really cool. The central feature is this beautiful red ramp, but it's also got 7-foot wide corridors, motion sensor hand-free building controls, restroom doors that can be opened by tapping a push bar with your foot or your wheelchair or using your smartphone. And these high contrasting color designs helps people with low vision kind of see the space better. And my favorite is this multi-sensory wayfinding system, which includes, quote, a fountain on one end of the atrium that serves to assist those with sensory impairments. In hearing the pleasant sound of water flowing, individuals can orient themselves in the building and immediately know where they are in reference to the source of the sound. So I think that's really, really cool. I think it's a great example of how universal design can be a restriction that makes our designs even better because we're working within like kind of a set off space. And this place is so accessible that people take the BART in from other parts of the city just to use the restroom because it's one of the only restrooms that's accessible to so many different people. And I also think that another thing that's really important about it is that I think the design stands on its own. I don't think you look at this building and you think, oh yes, accessibility building. I think it's just a beautiful building. And I think that's where universal design can really shine. Another example of universal design that more people might know of is OXO, which is the popular kitchen tool company. They're in Target and probably like Crate & Barrel and like pretty much everywhere. And it was founded on the principle of universal design. Their website still has stuff all about universal design on their About Us page. And their tools were originally designed because the founder noticed that his wife was having a difficult time using the peeler with her arthritis. So he didn't invent a peeler that was for people with arthritis. He just invented a better peeler. So this is kind of the thing that made me think about accessibility on the web in a different way. And it's the idea that disability is a disconnect between people's abilities and the built environment. So it means that disability only exists when we design things for ourselves and not for everyone. And that sounds kind of depressing, but I think it's actually kind of exciting because it means that we have control and we have an opportunity to make spaces less or more accessible and to lessen the effect of disabilities. And like if you think about it, if we all had wheels for feet and we were just like kind of wheeling around everywhere, there wouldn't be stairs. There would just be ramps. Like we wouldn't even know what stairs were. That wouldn't even be a concept. So I think if we can kind of think about it that way, it kind of can shift kind of the feeling around accessibility and why we do it on the web. And I really think that we need to view the internet as the new built environment. So much of our lives are built around the web. We pay taxes, we book hotels, we check our bank statements, we sign up for social services, and we research our civil rights. on the web, and it's essential that we make sure that we're not creating this new built environment that is leaving people behind, because 10% of people in the world need websites to be accessible in order to use them. It's a huge chunk of the population. Like, if you think about if Amazon.com's add to cart button didn't work for one out of every 10 people who came to the website, like, it would probably be a red flag, and some engineer would, like, his pager would go off in, like, the middle of the night, and they would have to fix it immediately. So I think we should think about accessibility in the same way. If you're not thinking about accessibility, if you're not being intentional about it, there's a good chance that your website is not working for 1 out of every 10 people. So I think it's important to keep in mind that what we do every day is really cool, and we're part of creating this new built environment. And it's important to take that really seriously and make sure that we're not creating disability on the way. I think it's really exciting to me that we have this opportunity, and that the web could help level the playing field for all. It could be this huge equalizer for us, but only if we are intentional about who we're building the web for. So I didn't talk too much about technical specifics, but my slides are up here. It's on my GitHub. Universal design, there's a resource for that. And then there's a bunch of accessibility basics, but if you want to tweet at me with your accessibility questions, I always like accessibility challenges. And there's also a really good Slack channel. It's called Web-A11Y. And there's a ton of accessibility experts, like people who know way more than me, and everyone there is really happy to help. So yeah, thank you for listening.